We've got two full-size EVs with us today, one new, one obviously not so new.
And there's a pretty big price difference between these two, so in this video we're going to compare them and see what makes sense to buy.
Over here we have the 2025 Hyundai Ioniq 6, and this is the limited all-wheel drive version, which means it comes with things like these huge 20-inch wheels. It's wrapped in Serenity White, which is more of a pearlescent white. Pretty snazzy, but it also has these active shutter grills, which is pretty crazy. A very common aspect of the Ioniq theme are the pixelations, which you will find all over this car, especially in the headlights and the taillights. The profile of the Ioniq 6 is very, very noticeable. It's a huge sloped kind of an egg shape, but on the back we have two different spoilers. It almost has like a Porsche whale tail spoiler up here, but it is very, very noticeable and stands out quite a bit.
By contrast, I have our 2014 Tesla Model S 85 rear-wheel drive. So this car is more than 10 years old, and the price reflects that. And because they've been making the Model S with only minor tweaks for such a long time from the exterior, this car doesn't necessarily look that dated. Because of the way this car in particular was spec'd, which is to say pretty basic, it's not the most standout design, especially compared to the Hyundai, which has a very unique shape. This blends in with traffic like no other, especially because it's silver, it's got a more basic wheel, doesn't have the big fancy sunroof. This is about as simple as you can spec them.
Checking out the interior of the Ioniq 6, and it is something to see. It definitely has the whole aspect of simplicity going on, but what it has over the Tesla, which has the same thing, is actual compartments in storage areas. Like this, the bottom portion of this is very similar to our Tesla Model S. However, we have this whole top portion, which gives us a lot of things like cup holders, our switches, even a wireless phone charging area, as well as USB-C ports, not to mention an accessible center console.
Now, if you're planning to buy any new or nearly new car and hold on to it for a long time, the best way that we can recommend saving money on the long term is by getting a Grainger extended warranty. Those warranties are great because you'll save money compared to other warranties. Plus, you'll get service from factory-trained technicians. They'll use OEM parts. So it's a great thing to get if you want to hold on to a car for a long time, and especially if it's a car that's not the cheapest. And this Ioniq 6 is not the most expensive EV by any margin, but one thing that I do love is it gives you a very unique, airy, and luxurious experience here on the interior, as well as the way that it drives.
Not to mention how quiet it is in here. They have taken a lot of steps to make sure that this remains a very quiet cabin driving experience, including a ton of layers of insulation between the floor and the carpet that we are in right now.
If you had to sum it up in one word, I would say serene. It's definitely a calm, nice, tranquil vehicle to drive. Also very good visibility out of the car.
Yeah, the hood doesn't sit up too far up. It's great visibility. Even for a vehicle that's sloped so much like this one is, it still has a pretty decent rear windshield to where my visibility is not blocked too much. When it comes to our infotainment, both the cluster and the infotainment screen are 12.3-inch screens, which gives us things like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And then our climate control buttons are going to be down here. What I don't like is that they are all touchscreen. However, I do like that they are not integrated solely into the infotainment screen. This is where you're going to find access to things like your heated and ventilated seats, as well as your heated steering wheel. The door panels themselves are really cool. It has this waved textured material here, and then this is actually the whole door pocket itself, where you're going to actually hold on to the handle, and then actual pockets themselves at the bottom for, what do you know, more storage. The steering wheel itself feels really nice to the touch. It has quite a few buttons, and this is where you're going to find your drive mode settings. It has everything from eco, normal, and sport. And then if you want to hold, you can go into snow setting, which is always nice to have if you are in those wintry climates.
Yeah, and the suspension's really comfortable. A lot of the roads that are around here near us immediately in Boulder, Colorado, and in Colorado in general, see some pretty wild temperature swings, and we've got some pretty rough roads. The ride on this car is really nice. It's comfortable. It doesn't beat you up. It's not like it's got a ton of body roll. This is not the Ionic 6N that we're looking forward to.
Right.
So it's not designed to be the tightest handling thing in the world. But with some corners coming up, it's still a low center of gravity like any EV. So it handles fine.
Exactly. You still feel very connected to the road, very planted. And no, like you said, this isn't the Ionic N or anything like that, but it is still pretty quick. 0 to 60 in 4.3 seconds, which ain't anything to be upset about.
No, not at all. And this being a dual motor, we've got 320 horsepower, 446 pound-feet of torque, so a big push of torque if we get on the throttle hard.
Woo!
It puts you back in the seat.
And that wasn't even in sport mode.
Yeah, so this car has got acceleration. It's just a good all-around package. It's a comfortable car. It's one that can accelerate well. It's pretty roomy. It's a nice thing to sit in. It's got nice technology. For me, there's no major complaints here.
No. The only thing that maybe anybody could complain about would be the range. Now, this specific trim, being the all-wheel drive with dual motor, comes with an estimated range of 270 miles, which is on the lower end compared to some of the other EVs, which can be in the 300, 400s right now.
Yeah, and even the rear-wheel drive version of this car with 18-inch wheels gets, if I remember right, over 340 miles of range. So this particular model is not going to get you the most amount of range. 300 miles is still decent, and we live here in Colorado where having all-wheel drive is pretty important. So that would be a sacrifice that I'd be willing to make. But yeah, under 300 miles of range is not a headline feature.
I would rather have the ability of it being all-wheel drive, especially in Colorado, over more range.
Yeah.
Personally.
But if maybe, if you lived in Florida or near the beach, you could potentially save money, get a single motor version of the car, get more range, and be better off.
That's true. The seats themselves are very comfortable. They have a lot of give to it, but they're also still very supportive. Whereas the Tesla, it seems all they did was make a supportive park bench, but without any give. Up top, we actually have a little sunroof, which is also something the Tesla does not have.
Inside of this Model S, even though it is over 10 years old, when this interior came out, it was a pretty big deal because we really hadn't seen an interior quite this minimalist, and it looked very futuristic, especially with this massive screen that's dominating the center of the dash. And to this day, this screen still very responsive. It's still pretty easy to use. It doesn't give you Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, some of the things that we've come to expect and to love in most modern cars, but it's still a pretty usable piece of technology, so that's not bad. We've got a digital instrument cluster up front. One thing I will say about this, and it's not unique to just this car because I've seen other older Model S's that do the same thing, looks like this gauge cluster is delaminating a little bit. It doesn't block your view of the screen in front of you, but it is indicative of a little bit of the quality on this interior, and that was always a pain point with these cars. This was a very futuristic looking interior, but the material quality and the build quality of it was not the best, especially for the price point that these were at when they were brand new. But these are very inexpensive vehicles now, which we'll talk about in a moment. This particular Model S is spec'd to be pretty basic, so we don't have the massive sunroof like I mentioned, and it's not a very colorful or exciting interior to look at. We've also got a lot of piano black, and piano black doesn't age that well. It always looks a little dirty. There's also not a lot of storage in this interior. We do have a small glove box, but otherwise no big center console, so a lot of people would go and accessorize their center consoles a little bit. So this one, we've got a larger cup holder, we've got some coin slots and some cubbies built into this piece right here, and you could get some other things like a center console that you would be able to store some more stuff in, but there's not a ton of room to stash your things. Like the rest of this interior, these seats are relatively basic, but not too uncomfortable. They're slightly bolstered, and there's a mix of different materials on these seats between this cloth and this vinyl, so it's not a bad seat. Hitting the road in our old Model S, this car has over 100,000 miles, about 103,000, and Jen, what do you think?
Well, I mean, for any car that has over 100,000 miles, this is actually held up pretty decently.
Yeah, it's held up okay. It could use a few bits of maintenance. There's definitely a portion of the suspension that seems like bushing might be going bad because it makes a bit of noise.
Yeah, I think we need a new control arm on the front passenger section, and it's noticeable for sure.
Yeah, you hear it when you're driving, especially over an uneven surface. But otherwise, yeah, the car drives okay. It's not that old of a car, so it doesn't drive like a Ford Model T. It's a fine thing to drive. We've also, on this rear motor, this single motor rear wheel drive model, got 362 horsepower, 325 pound-feet of torque.
Right.
Which are decent numbers. If I get on the throttle hard, it definitely puts you back in the seat. So you could still impress some people with the acceleration.
Yeah, I will say that the range has kept up pretty good. You know, these new had an expected 265 miles of range. When I did my Denver 100 loop 2 times around, it got about 240 miles. Now, batteries will degrade over time, just like, you know, a laptop battery or your cell phone battery. They're just not going to last as long. But the rate at what it degrades at is more so based on driving experience, how that previous owner drove the car. If they drove it really fast or really hard or anything like that, that is going to change at what rate your expected range is going to be. But this one is still held up pretty good 11 years later.
Yeah, and these batteries don't degrade nearly as fast as a lot of people expect, because that first crop of first generation Nissan Leafs had air-cooled batteries, and people would drive them fast on the highway in a hot climate like in Arizona, and those batteries would degrade pretty quickly. There's plenty of these Model S's out there on the road that have very high miles, and their batteries are doing fine. So they can last for a pretty long time.
Jumping into the back of the Ioniq 6, and it is spacious, to say the least, for your legs. However, for your head, that major slope is definitely going to be noticeable back here. I'm 5'7" for reference. If you're any taller than me, this may pose as an uncomfortable situation. However, the leg space is grand back here, and plus we have a flat floor, which makes even sitting in the middle very comfortable. We do have some air vents back here, as well as a couple USB-C ports. And checking out the squish factor. Pretty firm, very nice. Couple cup holders. Overall, very, very comfortable back here, minus the headroom.
In the rear of the Model S, it's a pretty basic spot to be. We do have vents, which is great. That always adds a level of comfort, but there's no pockets on the backs of the seats. There's no console for you to fold down, rest your arm on, or to put cups in. So it's a pretty basic spot. There's not a whole lot. As far as room goes, it's not too bad. This roof isn't sloped quite as much as the Ioniq, so I, at 5'10", have fine enough headroom. If I was Andre's size, Roman's size, if I was well over 6 foot, it would get a little tight, but legroom, also not bad. Now, Tommy in the past has described this as being a fun car to drive. I think it's a pretty mild thing to drive. I think the acceleration is fun.
Yes.
The fact that it's rear-wheel drive, that's cool, and it's on a pretty skinny tire, so you could maybe turn the traction control
it's
off
not
and
bad.
have some fun. But
I think being on the inside while you're just kind of cruising along is where it isn't so much fun anymore.
To the Model S's credit, we've got a decent frunk, about 3 cubic feet of space, which is enough for you to put a couple overnight bags, some groceries, your charger, or whatever you need, and that makes it pretty useful.
Under the hood of the Ioniq 6, you're gonna find not a whole lot of space, maybe up to 5 or 6 Subway sandwiches, maybe a diary or 2, but definitely not enough room to put like a bag or anything like that. So that is a little disappointing. When it comes to some safety features, this does have some driver assistance features such as smart cruise control and lane keep assist, which is very similar to some of the autopilot features that Tesla will have. However, that Model S does not have autopilot.
Yeah, because it's a 2014, it's much older, so there's some of those modern features that car is going to be lacking compared to this.
Right. One thing I do like are the paddle shifters that we have here, and that is going to adjust your regen amount for your braking. So that is pretty cool that we have that. Tesla doesn't have that.
Yeah, it's a fun thing to play around with on the fly. They're almost act a little bit like paddle shifters. If you click the left paddle, it will put you into the next more aggressive regen setting. And if you're going downhill, down a mountain maybe, it's a really nice thing to play with. And if you want it to not regen so aggressively, then you can set it to coast a little bit more. Hyundai and Kia do that across several of their electric models, and it is an awesome feature.
Yeah, I know a lot of people don't necessarily like the so aggressive regen to where it's one pedal driving, but man, I got used to it and I love the ability to have one pedal driving.
And again, it's so easy to adjust it. It's not like you have to go into the screen to do it. You just mess around with the paddles and you can set it exactly where you want it to be in that particular moment.
Right, exactly. Case, one thing that this does have that really gives it a leg up is the capability of the supercharging network.
Yeah, this car, they claim, can charge from 10 to 80% in 18 minutes. So this is definitely a fast charging car, which is going to help make up for that range that's maybe less than stellar on this particular model, because you'll be able to replenish the battery pretty quickly.
Not only quickly, but to be able to be part of the expansive supercharging network, that's huge too.
Yeah, so a lot of places that you can charge it, and the charging experience should be pretty decent.
Absolutely. Continuing with the pixelation theme, they've added some to the trunk button right here. Give that a little press, automatic trunk. But the issue with the profile of this car being so sloped cuts into your cargo space only 11 cubic feet back here. Underneath the subfloor is where you're going to find your charging cables and a tire mobility kit. However, no spare coming with this EV.
The rear of the Model S opens up more like a hatchback, even though it's shaped like a sedan, and that gives you a very large area where you can load in your cargo and about 26 cubic feet of space, which is a decent amount. The other nice thing, if you want to hide some more things out of the way, you could put your charger or anything that you want underneath the load floor, which is also great. So this car versus the Ionic feels just a lot more fresh and clean and calm and airy to be in, versus this car, which it gets around, it does the job, and it costs a lot less money than the Ionic, so you really can't knock it for that. But I wouldn't say that you'd hang your hat on this car based off of the driving experience.
No, I wouldn't say that I would buy this car for the driving experience. I would buy this car for the free supercharging. However, the supercharging is limited, the speed, so you're going to be there forever compared to the Ionic 6, where you can charge up to 10 to 80% in 18 minutes. So yes, you can free supercharge, but for how long do you want to be there?
As slow as the free supercharging is, and as inexpensive in most places as the electricity itself costs, your time is probably worth more than the money that you would save by spending a bunch of time at a supercharger charging for free. So it is theoretically a perk of the car, but in practice, maybe not the most useful thing.
No, not to mention the seats, Case.
You don't like them?
The seats are what I've always said since 2017 when I started at Tesla. They feel like a park bench. There's just no support to it.
Yeah, to be fair, there's not a lot of contour to the seat.
No, it's just very flat.
So it's not the most comfortable thing, and I don't think the ride quality on this is quite as refined as that Ionic. So you can tell that this is not a brand new car. It's not a modern car. From the way that it feels and the way that it drives, this feels like the previous generation of EVs. And again, it's not the end of the world, but compared to something brand new, it's a noticeable difference. The best thing about this Model S is something that we haven't said quite yet. We've alluded to it, but we paid $13,000 for this car, which is a fraction of what it costs new, and it's a fraction of what that costs.
That's true, because this one is coming in at just over $55,000. However, what this has and yours doesn't is very important, and that is a warranty.
That's true. So if anything happens to this car, it's covered, which is great. This is also a nicer car, definitively. It's a nicer interior. It's a more modern EV. It's got more modern features. This one is aging a little bit, even mechanically, and even as well as it's held up at 100,000 miles.
Right.
So you kind of get what you pay for. The other thing I will mention, though, that I think you can appreciate is that depreciation when you buy EVs is usually pretty steep.
It is.
If you buy one of these, how much more is it going to depreciate down from $13,000?
That's true, you know, and you can always keep up on maintenance with these, especially with the mechanical things like the suspension and what we talked about before earlier, where this does need some suspension work. However, when it comes to the battery health, sometimes that just kind of comes out of nowhere, and a battery replacement for the Model S can run you anywhere from $12,000 to $15,000.
That being said, there are a lot of these cars on the road with hundreds of thousands of miles, 300, 400,000 miles, and their batteries are still doing pretty well. So they can be decent long-term cars. That Hyundai is definitely a much nicer car.
Right.
So realistically, they're for two different buyers.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know what you guys think in the comments below, which one you would go for if you were in the market for a full-size EV. This has been Case, Jen, and Mary behind the camera. Thank you for watching.